Afternoon all. My name is Danielle Cave and I am the Deputy Director of our International Cyber Policy Centre here at ASPI. I want to welcome all of our attendees this afternoon. It looks like we have 60 participants, which is a very large group. Welcome to everyone's babies, children and pets who may be hovering in the background of your work from home spaces. And I also wanted to welcome our participants zooming in from outside of Australia, and particularly welcome and send our best wishes to our participants from the Pacific Island region, some of whom have been badly impacted by Cyclone Harold, which has hit the region incredibly hard this week. For those who don't follow our work closely, for a very quick introduction, our centre is a 25-person team that focuses on a range of cyber, technology and information issues. We have a variety of teams that work on a broad range of projects, including on cyber capacity building and cyber norms in Southeast Asia, internet safety, on 5G and critical tech, surveillance technology and human rights, on disinformation and information operations, on technology transfer and the global expansion of China's technology giants. And because ASPI is an Australian think tank, we take a very natural focus on the Indo-Pacific region. And we have come together this afternoon to talk about e-governance and digital issues in the Pacific Island region, and specifically a project that we have worked on for the past 2 years in partnership with Estonia's e-governance academy. This project involved close engagement with a range of Pacific Island governments, workshops in the region and then back here in Canberra, and the publication of this report earlier this year, which I encourage you all to read if you haven't had a scan already, which is available on our website. And it's important to note that this project was enabled with funding from the Cyber Cooperation Program at the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, Australia's DFAT, and the Estonian Development Corporation. Before I introduce our two speakers, let me run through some quick housekeeping issues. This is our first virtual roundtable, so please bear with us if there are any small technical hiccups. This event is a public event. It is being filmed and it will end up on YouTube later this week. I'm going to pepper our two speakers with questions over the next 20 to 30 minutes. And I then encourage you all to put forward questions. There are two ways you can do that. You can type your questions in the Q&A box, which is directly at the bottom. It's not the chat one, it's Q&A. So it's the third or fourth icon at the bottom of your Zoom site. There's a second option as well, and you can virtually raise your hand and I will then apparently be able to throw to you. And if it all works correctly, you will pop on the screen and ask your question or make your comment. And we'd love to try that as well. So I really encourage people to start raising your hands in half an hour. And I'll give everyone a couple minutes notice when I'm going to jump to question time. Now, let me briefly introduce our two speakers. Their full bios are on our website, so I'll be quick. We are very lucky to be joined by Hannes Astok this morning. Well, in his morning, he's gotten up really early to join us from Estonia, and we're very grateful that he woke up at the crack of dawn to join us. He's the Deputy Director for Strategy and Development at the e-Governance Academy. And before he joined the Academy, Hannes served as a member of the Estonian Parliament between 2007 and 2011, where he mainly dealt with the development of information society and issues related to the regulation of IP and electronic communication. Also joining us today is my colleague Bart, who I think is quite well known to many of you that we saw were participating today. Bart has worked at ASPI for a number of years now, and he runs our cyber capacity building program. This program includes a portfolio of initiatives that focuses on supporting states with the development of national cybersecurity strategies, strengthening ICT capabilities in developing nations, and enhancing regional mechanisms for stability in cyberspace. And Bart also manages our cyber scenario exercise program, and we continue to run that with a number of governments and multilateral partners around the world. Now, Bart, I'm going to pick on you first, so get prepared to unmute yourself in about 30 seconds. To kick us off, and I know that not everybody reads fantastic 50-page think tank reports back to back, so let's assume there are participants here in our virtual roundtable that have not read the report and perhaps only had the quickest of scans. Could you talk us through the summary of both the project and the key findings of the resulting report?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Danielle, and hope everyone can hear me loud and clear. And thanks everyone for joining this webinar. And in fact, the main reason for organising this conversation was the publication of our report last February during the regional conference on the Pacific, organised by the Oceania Cybersecurity Centre and the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise. As you mentioned, Danielle, the report is one of a number of deliverables that we delivered, obviously, from a capacity building project that was funded by DFID's Cyber Cooperation Programme and the Estonian government. And the project looked at identifying ways how we could support 6 Pacific Island countries, which you can find in the title of the report. So there's Fiji, Papua New Guinea, Samoa, Solomon Islands, Tonga, and Vanuatu, to see how we could support them in developing or strengthening the development of their e-government roadmaps. And some of those states had been working on it already for a while. And at the same time, we tried to look at, or we tried to explore whether there were any opportunities for a strengthened regional approach to this topic. Obviously, I want to recognize the great support we received from the states, from the government officials of the countries that I just mentioned. But I should also mention Kiribati and New Caledonia, who joined parts of our activities. So the activities included a number of regional workshops that we organized in the region as well as in Canberra, a number of visits that we undertook together with eGovernance Academy, and Hannes, who will speak in a minute, was our lead expert for that, and obviously this assessment report. And kind of in that assessment report, we tried to look at a number of things. So first of all, we wanted to create some clarity around the term e-governance or e-government. And as you can read in the report, we try to kind of keep it as factual as possible and try to look at what kind of capabilities would you expect a state to have that says it's working on e-government. So we try to look at what kind of infrastructure is there, both in terms of kind of the physical access and connectivity, but also what kind of networks, data centers, and other infrastructure is there, both on the side of the government, but also in the available commercially or in the public domain. We try to look at what kind of e-services are already delivered at this stage, which can range from online government portals that citizens can access, as well as places where you can do online registration of the birth of your child or your car license plate and things like that. And we looked at what kind of capabilities are in place in terms of national digital identity frameworks or systems, as that kind of underpins most of the e-government work, because as a government, you need to certify that you are speaking with a legit citizen of your country. We couldn't escape to also have a bit of a look at some of the work that's currently going on, and which has been going on for quite a while in terms of submarine cables. And we saw that the latest cable partly funded by the Australian government got online earlier this year, connecting Sydney with the Solomon Islands and Papua New Guinea. But obviously the World Bank has been investing in this since the early 2000s as well. Quite interesting, one of the satellite companies approached us a couple of weeks ago saying, well, why don't you talk about satellite capabilities? And obviously we do in the report. And actually, that still serves as a major background for the region to connect the more remote outer islands, as well as a backup in case the submarine cable is offline for whatever reason. I think I would like to, let's say, probably at this point pick up on 2 things that we noticed. One is probably the issue of how do you ensure that society takes up these new opportunities, and how do you include user perspectives? So as in so many other countries, including in Australia and most countries in the world, there have been great projects, often I would say equipment-based projects, that eventually do not sustain. And maybe in a country like Australia, that's not so much of a big issue, but in a Pacific Island country with scarce resources in terms of human staff, but also financially, this might be more of a concern. So we see that in some cases projects have been started where people and communities are just not so interested in the service that's being provided. There is simply no demand or appetite or a need to go digital. Sometimes equipment simply doesn't sustain in the climatic or economic setting of the nations. Think very basically about, let's say, the supply of electricity. But also very interestingly, that you hear sometimes some kind of resistance or hesitance from communities to start using online applications provided by government, or to join social media in the first place. So there are, let's say, a number of social aspects that I think have gone largely unnoticed, or haven't been really included in talking about how do you encourage e-government capabilities or digital transformations in most countries, including here in the Pacific. The second element that I think I need to flag, let's say, as part of the Cyber Policy Center at ASPI, is the element of cybersecurity, data protection, and privacy. We see that you kind of observe that most states are focusing on it, but it's still very embryonic. There are some states, in particular, I would say Vanuatu, which has quite some well-developed policies. But you don't see it, let's say, being picked up as a true priority, despite it being one of the 4 pillars of the Boe Declaration of Regional Security that was adopted by the Pacific Island Forum. Without also not recognize, while I also want to recognize, of course, the work that has been put into developing computer emergency response teams in a number of countries, but we see that the ability to sustain that financially and in terms of human resources is really a challenge for most of the countries. I'll leave it at that for the moment, Danielle. And yeah.
Thank you, Bart. Hannes, I'm going to throw to you. I wondered if you could give us a burst on the Estonian E-Governance Academy, so that all of our participants, and we've hit 72 now, so it's quite a large group, and sort of talk about that academy and its history and how it came about and its role. And then I wondered if you could share some insights into how this program of work came together, because it strikes me that this is a very unusual, well, it's not unusual, but this is quite a unique partnership between Estonia, Australia, and then 6 Pacific Island countries. I'm assuming there's not a whole heap more partnerships that look a lot like this one, and it'd be great to hear how it all came about from your perspective.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. I'm Hannes Astok from Estonian E-Governance Academy, and I have met many of you already in person during the last couple of years when visiting your countries and having those great events in the frames of this project. Estonia is a tiny country in North Europe, 1.2 million population only, and but having this in mind, that we are very small, and also like regaining independence from collapsed Soviet Union only for 30 years ago, there are a lot of similarities with many countries in the world and also with countries in Pacific. Estonia has reached a lot by making the government and whole society digital, and actually we can see that this is very fruitful also in current corona crisis situation, as most of the people are capable to work from home and make their transactions both with the government but also with the private businesses and other citizens in the digital format. E-Governance Academy is a knowledge center in Estonia, and we are assisting a lot of countries globally to transform their government policies and practices from paper to digital. And we have been working with more than 130 governments globally during the last 15 years as we have been in business. This certain project actually started 3 years ago after the discussions between the Australian and the Estonian government about the digital situation in the Pacific and a couple of high-level visits. And it was very successful cooperation between Australian Strategic Policy Institute and E-Governance Academy to discuss with 6 governments in South Pacific about the digital future, their digital system and digital organizations. So the report, what is published now and available for you, reflects our views, but also countries we were working were getting more precise and more detailed comments about their situations and suggestions for the follow-up steps. So this is in a nutshell about the project and about Estonia and e-Governance Academy. And we are actually still closely following the situation in the countries and working closely with some of you also in the frames of other projects. So we are happy to continue those discussions and happy to support the digital development in South Pacific. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannes. But I'm going to ask you, one of the key takeaways from this report is that there is a greater need for an integrated approach to e-governance and the use of ICTs. I wondered if you, or Hannes, if you wanted to chime in here as well, that would be great, could highlight any good examples in the region, but also, and Hannes, this is especially for you, globally, where you think this linkage between e-governance and ICTs is working very well. I'd also be very interested to hear about which donors, companies, civil society groups, foreign governments are involved in some of these initiatives.
Shall I go first, and then I'll pass on to Hannes. Yes, indeed. Let's say in 2 ways we are in our conclusions and recommendations setting saying that probably a more integrated approach is required if we want to be more sustainable around the implementation of e-government systems in countries like the Pacific. And that mainly looks at I think at 2 angles. One is I would say the reoccurring finding from every visit and every conversation that we've had was it's so difficult to coordinate internally within government. Even though governments are small, it's very difficult to come up with, let's say, a whole of government policy on something. In particular, on issues related to information and communication technology. So what you see is that those working on this, those being responsible for ICTs are largely technical ministries with technical people who find it hard to, let's say, engage more at the policy level across government. And at the same time, most states in their national development strategies do recognize the potential that ICT bring to socio-economic development and for more efficient and more effective delivery of public services. So our recommendation there was if countries really take ICT seriously and indeed see it as a key enabler for their socio-economic development, then ICT issues should be a part of a whole of government policy approach rather than sitting within either the Ministry of the ICTs or the Ministry of Finance. So that's, let's say, on the side of those countries working on the digital transformation or on implementing e-government capabilities. But I would argue the same goes for most of the bilateral donors who are working in the region, where you see a discrepancy between kind of the desks that look at the region or let's say running the regional desks, those looking at cyber affairs issues or ICT issues, and those looking at kind of traditional international systems mechanisms. So you see this kind of 3 different silos of donor agencies, which in some cases, I mean, do synchronize their work, but in most cases, I think there is still a kind of a discrepancy. But I would say there are also a few good examples, and maybe I would like just to flag 2. One is, I think, and it's not because it's the Australian government, but I was really surprised to see the work that's being done in the Solomon Islands, where there is a governance support program which looks at, let's say, governance in a very broad spectrum, but ICTs is an integrated part of that support package. So it talks about public administration reform. It's kind of, that's the project tackles, that's everything that's related to good governance, And ICT developments are an integrated part of that, which includes the provision of technical advisors on a permanent basis in one of the departments. And I think they've made some great steps over the last year and a half. And the other, I would say, very promising project, I would say, is the project in Tonga, where the World Bank is currently supporting a digital government program, where they managed to, which includes obviously all of the key ministries, as well as the head of state, where they've just released quite recently a digital government roadmap for the first time, and then now let's get going in a structural manner through the different steps to get to the inclusion of ICTs across government, and not just in that case with the Ministry of ICTs or MITEC. Over to you, Hannes.
Yeah, thank you, Bart. I will continue from a point where Bart started, and I think of the critical issue for most of the countries trying to implement more digital government is really to figure out how to utilize digital across the government, not as a separate project, but how to introduce the digital across the government as a general approach and try to digitalize the processes. And there are many benefits from being digital, starting with a better transparency, better access to the services, but also considering the natural disaster hazards. It's really important to make the data digital and store it safely, not only in your own country, but also as a backups in some other countries or even in some other regions, to make sure that if there is a natural disaster like a tropical cyclone, and the current Harold is really good and bad sample at the same time, is like hopefully encouraging governments also to think how to make data digital and store it securely, both in the country but as a backup copies in another countries. So this what leads us to the following issues, what we described also in our final report. So there is in most of the countries there is a lack of coordination across the government. So still most of the ministries and agencies acting in silos. So there should be clearly more role for someone as a ministry or prime minister office, president office, who will coordinate all these digital efforts, not doing everything instead of other ministries and agencies, but coordinating those efforts. Also, there is a need for discussion about e-governance architecture, because there is a high risk even in small countries that ministries and agencies developing their own information systems, what is great, but if a joint architecture is missing, there is a high risk that those information systems are not capable to talk to each other. So sharing the data between the ministries and agencies and across the government is becoming more and more important. And for this reason, every government needs agreed e-government architecture, what is assisting actually to save a lot of money in future. Also, there is a need for better organizing the databases and data in the databases, because data is kind of backbone of every government. And we have seen successful stories from various governments where unique numeric identifiers are assigned for people, for the property, for the businesses. So unique citizen number, unique business number, unique land parcel number is kind of key to sort out the data in the databases to make it inter-exchangeable. So machines can understand also that this is the same person we are dealing with, this is the same business we are dealing with, this is the same land parcel we are dealing with. So implementation of a unique numeric identifiers across the government for various objects is really important, and success stories what have been happening in several countries could be as a sample for others also. Also, there is a need for better planning how to exchange data securely between government institutions. And to exchange securely doesn't mean that it's exchanged in CD-ROMs or flash drives. There should be more complex and more secure solutions available. And also, there is a strong need to develop strong digital identity for the citizens, and already many governments in South Pacific region are thinking about it, how to do it. So strong digital identity is very clear precondition to put digital services also online for the citizens. And on the top of it, definitely we need better legislation, we need better applications, and last but not least, what is really great necessity in almost all countries in the region is the skills. Because there is a skills gap in technical staff, in business process analysis, and also in general in the government. So whatever skills development opportunities there are, they are all very much welcomed and very much needed also in the long run to make the governments more digital. So this is in a nutshell. And last but not least, there is a really great need to develop regional cooperation. And for this reason, also current webinar, I think, is very valuable. And I want to thank my colleagues from Australian Strategic Policy Institute to organizing it, because there is a lot what countries can learn from each other in the region, and boosting regional experience sharing is one key for the digital future. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Hannes. I'm going to ask one more question, and I'm going to go back to you actually. But before I kick off this last question, after that we'll go to Q&A. So I can already see that there's a question in here about China. I'll get to that next. I can see someone's just jumped in another question. That's perfect. And I would encourage, there's a lot of people on the line who work in this issue. There's a lot of experts. There's a bunch of different people. I really would encourage you to raise your hand. It should be, if facing the screen on the right-hand side, there's a little invite, mute, raise hand. At least that's what I can see. I would encourage people to start raising your hand, and we'll try to get to you as soon as we can. So Hannes and Bart, I want to ask about COVID-19, which is affecting just about every country around the world. And I've been thinking a lot about this in the Australian context. Australia's had a really rough period of time of really severe bushfires, and we've sort of had a very brief period of a break, and we've gone straight into COVID. And when those things happen, it completely absorbs and disrupts, everybody, but especially policymakers who have to put aside non-urgent issues and focus on bushfires or COVID. And you can see that absolutely consuming large parts of the Australian Public Service in Canberra at the moment. So I wanted to ask, what could we expect in the Pacific Island region or in other regions? Could we see a sort of a deceleration effect when it comes to e-governance and ICT issues, with governments saying, okay, well, I have, there's a cyclone at the moment, huge impacts from that. There's ongoing issues with climate change, and now there's COVID. Is it possible that this ICTs and e-governance could be picked up and put into the too hard basket and paused for the short term? Or could we see the opposite, that some of these things will sort of accelerate conversations around, like what you said, digital identity, and getting governments to put a sort of greater focus on this in the short term? So Hannes, let's start with you, and then we'll jump to Bart.
If I may start, it's always a big question: will the government use this crisis or any crisis to make big steps forward, or they are just wasting the opportunities of a crisis actually? And what we can see globally actually, including our own country, that definitely the first focus in this current COVID crisis will go for the healthcare, for the various other limitations, how to support the economy. And this is all very much fine. but at the same time, it also highlights us that there are like a structural gaps, and if the governments can think also during the crisis that how we can be stronger after the crisis and how we can utilize this crisis to make our government stronger, this is the big question. And current crisis, when especially movement of the people, also not only internationally, but in every village and every city, even it's very much limited. This also like shows us that if we can work digitally and remotely, this will be the opportunity how to survive in this kind of crises, but also use it later, because what we have seen also in Estonia, that like most of offices are empty, everyone is working from home. So this means that maybe we don't need that much office space anymore. If we can move all the documents digitally, so it makes the government functioning much better. If citizens can access services digitally, it's boosting also development of a lot of services that are not digital still. So this is an opportunity, and this is probably the model for the future, because there are many people who don't want to work in the offices or not to work from the offices every day, or they can access all the documentation they are working with remotely when they are traveling, also inside the country or internationally. So it's changing the working model. So and the question is how the governments are making it happening. Also, we have seen in some other countries that governments' work has been stopped almost because everything is still in paper. So to move the papers, to make a decisions, still someone must run with the papers instead of sharing the information digitally. So I'm asking also all the governments who are participating here to think how we can utilize this crisis to make our governments more digital, make the workflows more digital, because we don't know what is the next crisis or what is the next reality, how we will work. So more digital we are, more flexible we are and more ready for the next crisis or new lifestyle. Thank you.
Bart, let's jump over to you, and then I'm going to start picking up on questions.
Yeah, perfect. I mean, obviously, I'm not fully aware of what's the response to by government at the moment to COVID and how they're using ICTs. I just some anecdotal information is, for instance, that the team from the Solomon Islands could not join this webinar because they are currently meeting around, let's say, their government response to COVID-19, and evidently the ICT team is part of the dialogue, which I think is a very good sign. And in fact, the Solomon Islands government just launched a new website portal, I think a couple of weeks ago, which has a pretty, let's say, large section on COVID-19 information and what citizens should do and should not do. And I think we've seen in the recent past a few cases where governments actually took the advantage of a crisis. So for instance, when Vanuatu was hit by Cyclone Pam, they used information technologies to send out early warning messages and speed up the recovery afterwards. So they really took advantage of that natural disaster to use these new technologies for not just for the benefit of government, but for the people there as well. And I think that case is pretty well documented publicly. There's also, the example of Samoa, where ICTs are mainly being used for information around fisheries and kind of the maritime information, which is evidently very important for rural communities for their livelihood. So I think that's another example where ICTs are not being used, let's say, in the traditional sense that we might expect it, but where it works in the specific local context of Samoa. And Tonga was cut off in January last year when their single submarine cable was damaged by a vessel. And I think they very well realized that this was a major vulnerability. I think not soon afterwards, they signed a 15-year deal with one of the satellite companies so that there is a backup for their connectivity. So I think there are a number of examples where governments took advantage of a crisis to actually expedite the take-up of ICTs. Now, there's also a downside to that, but I'll probably leave that to one of the Q&As in a minute.
All right, great, but let's stay with you here. I'm going to ask, there's a Q&A that's coming from Alison Bailey. I'm going to go to that, get you to answer that, and then I'm going to throw to Amanda Watson, and I'm delighted that she's put her hand up, and we'll both see if that feature works. And Amanda, we'd love to hear from you and to dive into this discussion. So, Bart, the question from Alison that came in a little earlier is, what, if any, impact is China's interest in the region having on the availability of online capabilities, or is it too early to have an impact?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think it's on many people's mind. I can't tell, let's say, what has been the impact of China's investments in the region. I think just to note that China is a major donor and major investor in the region. So when we look at ICTs and even e-government capabilities, out of the 6 countries that we included in our research, 5 of them had their domestic government network infrastructure and data storage provided through a loan from the Chinese Export-Import Bank. I think that's a major sign of, let's say, China's investments in the region, also in the area of ICTs and e-governance. I think what you see is that if you compare, let's say, China's aid to, for instance, Australia's aid or New Zealand's aid, that China is really focusing on kind of turnkey infrastructure, whereas others are focusing on more smaller scale projects, which focus on kind of applying and using the connectivity and the resources. About the impacts, I think there is still not very much kind of information or research being done on that. I think there are examples on both sides of the coin. So both from projects done by, let's say, the Western countries as well as by China, that projects are very successful, but also many projects where infrastructure or equipment is being built and put in place, but it's hardly being used. If I'm not mistaken, for instance, the system that's been provided by through the Chinese government in Papua New Guinea is hardly being used by government, which is at the moment a major obstacle to kind of expedite their e-government process. So I think there are examples on both sides. They are a major player. They're not very much part of, let's say, the donor dialogue, maybe quite understandably, but they are definitely an actor to reckon with in the Pacific at the moment.
Thanks, Bart. Let's attempt this throw to Amanda, and she might also have some views on this last question.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I'm not sure if you can see me or not, but anyway, my question is about digital inequality, and just wondering about if increasing use of digital technologies and e-government could lead to further marginalisation of people who are already disadvantaged because they don't have access to electricity or things like that. So that's my question. Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. Hannes, let's throw to you for that one.
Yeah, thank you. If I understand correctly, there were some interruptions, but I think we don't need to limit ourselves to think that is everyone is connected. It's clear that in most of the countries there are still regions who are not connected because of lack of electricity, lack of connectivity. But we need to start as soon as possible with those who are already connected, and because it's building an e-government is also kind of experimenting. We're always building something new, but we don't know. We are building the future, and it's happening in every country because there are always specific issues in each and every country how to be successful. So I think definitely governments must deal with electricity issues, with connectivity issues, but at the same time start to experiment with a digital government also, with the active part of population, and then roll it out more and more to those who are maybe picking it up a bit later. Thank you.
But why don't you jump in there as well?
Well, I think Hannes is exactly right in describing it as an experiment. And I think this is the point that Amanda tries to make, is that if you are experimenting, you're not throwing the rest overboard. So if you're moving to online services and realizing that that many parts of your nation and of your society are not yet connected or not using it in a very kind of intense way, you still need the kind of your conventional means of communication and public service delivery. So I think, let's say, this kind of digital divide between those connected and using new technologies and those who are not yet doing it or not at all doing it is something a government needs to take into account. So completely moving to a digital environment, I think at this stage in most of the countries that we're talking about right now is not yet fit for purpose, maybe in due time. But I think we even have these conversations right now about in Australia, let's say, about the a Corona app and what's the critical mass to, let's say, use it. And I think the same kind of conversation you also have about the introduction of ICTs in the Pacific.
Thanks, Bart. Let's jump to the next question, which is incredibly relevant in these sort of COVID-19 times. So as for digital identity programs, is there a sufficient framework for the protection and assurance of human rights across the region? Hannes, do you want to start off with that?
Yeah, thank you. I think the human rights and personal data protection is a kind of key critical issue when you're developing digital services and e-government in each and every country. So, and the digital identity is definitely part of it. So whatever we do online with a digital identity and with digital services, what are definitely using your personal data, the data protection issues and privacy issues should be considered. But we cannot say that this will limit us. There should be kind of negotiated understanding in each and every society. What are the limits? How far we can go? And based on this understanding, what is negotiated in high level in the parliaments, in the governments, and with the society, various society groups, we can decide how far we can go in one or another country. So let's take it as an opportunity also. And then definitely the understanding about the privacy is also changing. And we need to discuss it with the people, but also teach the general population about those issues, because what we can see that people are very much worried about how government is using their data, but at the same time, they're sharing much more of their private life details in Facebook and other social media channels. So people must think also where is the actual risk about their privacy. So good discussion between governments, regulators, parliaments, and citizen groups is the key issue to figure out what is the suitable and sustainable model for each and every country. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannes. Bart, do you have anything to add here? No? Okay. I also know we have a number of participants dialing in from Tonga. We would love it if you wanted to put up your hand and jump into the conversation. I won't force you to do that, but just to let you know. I'm now going to throw to Luigi, I think, here.
That's correct. Thank you, Danielle. Look, this is an excellent body of work, so congratulations to the Estonian government agency and also ASPI for pulling it together. My question is quite simple, and I think, Hannes, you just touched on part of it. There's almost three parts. There's policy, there's a user community, individual rights, and then there's also the technology piece. It was interesting in your comment that in some of the island governments that we're speaking about, island nations, that there are still silos. And so my question is there a way that we can think about what we're trying to do, or you're trying to do here, is that doesn't bring all of the first world kind of issues around siloed organizations, broken end-to-end processes, lack of cable infrastructure and poor policy. It really unifies it, and you spoke about an architecture, and it's easy to think about a technology architecture, but an architecture that uses technology as the enabler, so we don't bring the cyber bullying. We use blockchain for land registries and birth, death, and marriage registries, and that links into digital identity. Is there any part of your study so far that ties, the people, the communities, policy, and technology into a unified architecture that it forms a roadmap for governments to exercise when funds are available or technology permits? Thanks, Danielle.
Bart, let's start with you.
Yeah, well, thanks, Luigi. I think that's exactly I think one of the points we try to make, and also one of the recommendations we said is there's definitely a need for a more integrated approach to dealing with these issues, to indeed not import, let's say, first world challenges into the Pacific. And I think I once said, as most countries are kind of, let's say, only recently have come online, in particular most communities, they're not entering the internet of the 1990s, but they're entering the internet of the, now 2020s, which is fundamentally different. At the same time, I think if we look at an integrated approach to this matter, I think there is a role for international aid agencies here to kind of encourage that and to promote that, and maybe providing those opportunities. And one of the things that popped up in a few conversations, but would never kind of, let's say, was followed through, is how do you engage local communities in these efforts? So should you invest much more, and that's been recognized by most countries, should you invest much more in awareness raising? But then I would argue that should not be awareness raising, telling people to start using it and be aware of all the risks and pursuing good cyber hygiene. It's also very much, let's say, about understanding what do people want from government, and what do people want from e-government. And I think that will be quite different from what we're seeing, let's say, in the Western world, or from, let's say, the most digitally advanced governments. And then I think at the same time, in terms of sustainability, I would argue that, let's say, the simpler a system you organize and you design, the better. So there's no point in rolling out a very complicated, very sophisticated system if you know it's not sustainable, maybe in the short term, but definitely not in the medium term or long term. So the simpler, the better. And probably we also need to be a bit more kind of self-restrained in what we're trying to encourage, and really have those community conversations, stakeholder conversations, like it's being, let's say, normal practice in traditional international systems.
Hannes, let's jump over to you now.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think South Pacific countries have a great opportunity to utilize the both experience of e-government, what has been existing globally already for 20 years, and then the latest technologies and how to combine it, because I think when Estonia started 20 years ago, there was nothing available, and we need to make all our mistakes by ourselves, and there was from nowhere to learn. But I think there is currently in South Pacific region countries, there is a huge opportunity to take a look what is available globally and how we can utilize it better in the current countries' traditions, culture, religious conditions. So I think the discussions with the communities how to utilize it better is one of the key issues, and also I think people in each and every country want to have better services from a government, whatever they are, and have them like it's existing in the most advanced countries, whatever it is a payment of subsidies or whatever applications handling. So, and this is all doable, and today, when the connectivity issue is solved in most of the countries, or will be solved soon, it will be really easy. You just need to have a smartphone and really, and what is needed from a government to have a really great, simple and understandable user interface to get those services. What is happening in background, it's not an issue for the people who is living in the village. They just need to have a great interface. But the background systems, maybe in this point, I cannot agree with Bart totally that the background systems are usually sophisticated. So for this, you need to have a technology, you need to have a skills and resources to make it really happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannes. All right, I'm going to we have more questions and comments than time. Hannes and Bart, I'm going to encourage you both, if you can get to some of the text questions. We might continue for 5 minutes just so you guys can touch base on some of those. No pressure though. But what I'm going to do is two things. I'll throw to Pera in about 10 seconds. When that question is asked, Bart and Hannes, I would also encourage you, if you've got one or two ideas for follow-up work in this area that governments, donors, civil society partners, that Pacific governments can take up, whatever it be, I'd love to hear those then. And then we're going to have to finish up in about 5 or 7 minutes. So, Pera, over to you. Pera, can you hear me? Are you able to talk and ask your question? Okay, we seem to be having some technical issues. Kelly, if you're able to, Pera, are you able to unmute? You'll have to unmute yourself before you talk. All right, we might go to another question then. I'm going to go to a simple one because we are running out of time. Oh, hang on. Here's Andrew. All right, so Andrew's jumped in here. Andrew, you're on. And you'll need to unmute yourself before you jump into this discussion. No. All right, Andrew, keep trying to, we'd love to hear from you. So if you can, Kelly will keep trying to unmute you. Bart and Hannes, in the meantime, let's hope that Andrew can jump in a minute or two. But why don't I throw to you on one or two ideas you've got for future work in this area? And then if Andrew pops in, I'll halt you and jump to him.
Yeah, thanks, Danielle. At the same time, I was looking at a few questions that were posted in the Q&A part. I mean, there are a few. I mean, nothing's kind of, let's say, being discussed in great detail at the moment. But we, based on the report and based on this conversation, I think there are a number of issues that we would like to explore for further work. And feel free to reach out after this session and share thoughts and be part of that dialogue. So I think one of the things we found is that individual countries have set up, let's say, specific or national capabilities. Think, for example, of the Cybersecurity Operations Center in Papua New Guinea. Think of a great piece of policy work that has been done in Vanuatu. Fiji is quite advanced in terms of, let's say, their government services that are being provided online, while at the same time all states, let's say, have issues with, as we mentioned before, human resources, financial sustainability, having secure infrastructure, which is not so much, maybe not kind of technical security, but kind of physical security of their devices, data centers, and hardware. Are there opportunities for some kind of regional pooling? So you may have heard, let's say, of something like a digital embassy. Could we look at a secure location where countries can store their national government data? So, and just to take on one example, we, when our friends from the Pacific were here in October last year, we visited Canberra data centers, where they made a very great explanation, demonstration of how both government data as well as commercial data was all located in the same premise, but there were kind of physical as well as logical sovereign borders, if you like, between those physical spaces. So I think that's a very interesting example where which could address some of the concerns that government officials have expressed. So that's maybe an idea to pursue in the future. One of the other things that I would be curious to explore as well is everyone is investing in this. At the same time, capability, support, expertise is scarce. So rather than everyone kind of fighting for the same scarce resources, is there some kind of regional pooling available? And I'm not sure, let's say one of the colleagues from the Pacific Regional Infrastructure Facility is here, but I think that's a great example of where international donors together with Pacific Island countries have decided to pool knowledge and expertise in a single platform, so that it's not that scarce resources are being put to bear in an efficient and effective way. And finally, of course, as a think tank, we're interested to see how we can keep, let's say, a report like this alive, whether we should see for an annual update of the report, and that should obviously be a kind of an interactive manner as well. So any ideas that are that you have or that you would like to share, we're very open to discuss that. All
right, Hannes, we're going to finish up in 2 minutes. Did you have one idea you want to throw forward?
I think there is a great opportunity for the governments also to share the infrastructure. If every government is connected with a submarine cable providing very high speed of internet, there is a opportunity to also share the infrastructure, the data exchange, the digital identity models and information systems and technical systems behind it, and so on. So both soft issues, coordination issues, but also technology. Thank you.
Thank you. That was very quick. We are going to finish up there. Hannes and Bart are going to try to get to some of these questions, and Pera has reappeared, and there's a great question here about to what extent are women in the Pacific being included in the e-governance architecture, which I would love to get answered, because, you know, as someone who works in this industry, this is an incredibly male-dominated industry, and I can only imagine that dominance is potentially more severe in the Pacific. So let me thank you all for participating. Many of you have stayed beyond the hour. We really appreciate it. We have lots of events and report launches coming down the pipeline at ASPI. Our next event and report launch in a couple of weeks is a fantastic policy paper on deep fake technology, democracy and national security, and that is a really great paper, and I'm really looking forward to launching that soon. I hope everyone has a good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us. We really appreciate you staying with us through our first virtual roundtable, and we'll see some of you at the next event, and please stay in touch.